Welcome to the You're Doing It Wrong podcast. I'm your host, Christian. Today I've got good friend Jason with me, and we're going to talk about a bit of cybersecurity, bit of technology, and possibly some beer and anything else that comes up.
Whatever floats
our boat. We've got some beers today, Corona.
Yep.
It's a nice warm day, so...
Perfect weather for it.
Yeah, I think so. Give us a little bit. You have quite a cool background.
Yep.
You've done some really interesting things through the years, but you got started as a special numbered employee at a very respected technology company. Give us the lowdown on that one.
Indeed. Well, look, so I guess the elevator pitch is started working for the federal government. Quickly discovered that I did not like bureaucracy at all. But I got to learn really cool stuff there. Then moved to Ireland for a while and couldn't get a job. So I'd been running the federal government, or a federal government department's network for several years. Thought I'd get a job easily. Couldn't get a job. So I took a job as a baggage handler at Aer Lingus. And the day before I was supposed to start, a recruiter rings me and says, "You've got Linux skills." I'm like, "Well, yeah, I use it as a hobby, not in the enterprise." And he's like, "Doesn't matter. Turn up to this place this time." So look it up. It's in a shady industrial estate right outside of Dublin. And I'm like, this seems shady. So go out there fully dressed in a suit, walk through the door, and there's a guy there in a Google t-shirt with pair of thongs on, or flip-flops for the non-Australians. And he looked at me and he goes, "You're not going to wear that to work, are you?" And I'm like, "I guess not." And
Overdressed.
The rest is history. So that was pre-IPO Google, when the employees numbered in the 500s. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So we built their first non-US data centers in Dublin, which were large. Probably small by today's standards.
Yeah.
But, coming from the government where we had what I considered large data centers, we had nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that sort of set me up, for my career. It taught me to think very differently to how I had worked before. Coming from somewhere that was very, very structured and you were pigeonholed, nothing like it. We did everything. Ran cables, crimped cables, deployed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of servers. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, awesome.
And worked as hard, and we played as hard as we worked. So
yeah, I bet that was fun times in the pre-IPO Google days.
100%.
Yeah,
OH&S was not a thing.
No, and especially in the data center. That
Yep.
Yeah.
It was mind blowing.
Yeah, the amount of gear you probably saw.
The amount of gear I RMA'd.
Yeah,
was insane. When you're RMAing pallets of DIMMs, it's like wild. And they would have been perfectly good for you and me. But because of what was being processed on them, and that, I guess the level of error for them was way lower than what would be for us.
Right.
So, they went back to the manufacturer.
Wow. It's something you don't ever think about.
No, no. And you got to remember, back then, a 1 gig DIMM was huge.
Yes.
Yeah. So
give us a highlight of working for Google during that time.
I think just the freedom to do what we needed to do. Like, they really did instill in us a level of trust. We occasionally had Americans over that would be there shadowing us. And I think they thought they were there to teach us, but I believe in hindsight, they were actually there to learn from us. We're a very small team, so only 5 of us. And we all got along. We were the most eccentric bunch of people you could ever put together. There was a guy from Cork, one from Dublin, one from the Isle of Islay in Scotland, where single vault, made its fame. Myself. So, and we were all very, very different, but we worked very well together, and we all had different skills that worked cohesively together. But I guess some of the highlights would be, some of the things I may have said that in hindsight, now I would definitely never say in front of someone else, but we were pretty loose back then. credit card goes over the bar every night, and off you go.
Nice.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, like walking into an empty data center and being told, the first thing we had to do was rip all the structured cabling out. So we Google bought a telecom company in Ireland and the data center with it and all their fiber from Ireland to the mainland to the UK and into Europe. So it was a very smart acquisition. But we've walked in, it had the smickest structured cabling I've ever seen. And the first thing I'm told is, get the bolt cutters out. This is all coming out.
Wow.
Because we were going to have to recertify every cable.
Oh, okay.
So it was like, well, just rerun it. Yeah. Got very good at throwing bundles of Cat 5e down overhead runs and stuff. But it was just awesome. I don't know how else to describe it. It was so unique an experience. And it helped me with my career. Was probably able to walk in and say, I was the first Aussie to work there in tech, which is wild. I think there was a girl in Sydney that was there before me, but she was in sales.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. It wasn't unusual to have thousands of servers offline at a time because safety in numbers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was crazy. I came from an environment where if anything's down, it's fix it now.
Fix it now.
No, it was like, no, don't worry about it. It's all good.
Yeah.
Hard to believe. I've actually still got 2 Google t-shirts that I was given as swag when I started. They're still whole, intact, unfaded.
Wow.
We're talking, it's 22 years now.
How often do you wear them?
Fairly regularly.
Okay.
I'm still a nerd, right?
Yeah. I have shirts that I've bought and I wore once and washed it and they faded and I'm going, what? Hang on.
I wore one to my new job a couple of weeks ago, and one of the people in my team, I looked at her and said, "This t-shirt's older than you are." They don't make them like they used to.
No.
But yeah, I mean, highlights were just the whole experience. There was nothing that I could single out that was just wild. Every single day was exciting to get out of bed.
Yeah,
even with a hangover. So.
I think. Well, that's a good point there. I mean, that you made, like being excited to get out of bed to go to work.
Yeah,
like that's
every day was an adventure.
Yeah.
And we had 2 bosses out of Mountain View. Both of them were like super, super intelligent guys, like some of the smartest people I've ever met, but just genuinely good human beings. The hardest part about it would have been the time shift.
Yeah.
So I think it's about 8 hours behind the US, something like that.
Ahead.
So yeah, ahead. So they would be working while we're asleep. And so you would wake up to 600-700 emails. So the first half of our day, before to midday, we'd be sitting there just processing all of our email.
Wow.
And then the real work started after lunch. So, which is kind of a really strange scenario. But and by the way, we used to read our email in MUT by SSHing into a Linux box. Which was called Your Mama.
That's great.
And I'm not sure that you'd get away with that these days, but anyway.
No. So was that pre-Gmail?
Yeah. So Gmail came about because we were using MUT on an SSH client to read mail, and someone was like, this is shit. So
you left Google to come back to Australia.
Yes.
And ended up
in healthcare for about 15 years, I guess, or 18 if you include the aged care, but working for a small company at first. That was pretty wild. I think we're about $167 million company and a really, really, really large healthcare company, ASX listed, tried a hostile takeover.
Oh, okay.
And our CEO at the time, brilliant man, he managed to raise 3.2 billion in funds and hostile take over their company.
Nice.
So we went from a very small fish in a very large pond to being the biggest fish in the very large pond. So that was quite the experience. We brought them into our network. Personally, I would have probably gone the other way. But that wasn't the person in charge at the time's ethos. So we had to work out how to merge their very large network into our very small network. So that was, a very altruistically fulfilling career. Took a personal toll. Used to work 16 to 20 hours a day, a lot of the days, and 7 days a week, as a salaried employee, of course.
Yes. Well, I guess you really cared about what you were doing.
Look, we provided affordable healthcare. So everything was bulk billed: imaging, pathology, medical centres. Even they had day surgeries as well, eye surgery, even dental in more recent times. And it was something that was really important to me, that people should be able to get great healthcare without, having to bankrupt themselves.
Yep.
So that sort of kept me going. And every time I thought about quitting, something good would happen. Like they went and bought a IVF company and then went, right, we're going to bulk bill IVF. And I'm like, I can't leave now. Damn you. But so that was a very, very large network. So we had over 2,600 sites across Australia, which I would believe would have made it one of the largest networks in Australia at the time.
Yeah. So was that kind of when you got into security more? Was that
100%? Also, I mean, yes, yeah. I was always interested in it, and from both sides of the coin. Grew up when the internet was the wild, wild west, and it fascinated me. So it was something that I was passionate about, but never really had the career path to go into. Now, so we didn't, at that said healthcare company, which shall remain unnamed, they didn't have a security function at all, or an IT risk function, or an architecture function. So I sort of ended up in all of those roles by default. Yeah. But I mean, my team, we were the group infrastructure team. So there are different lines of business: pathology, imaging, etc. We sort of caught all the hand grenades, but we were all very security focused by default as an operations team. We always thought about, we need to apply operational security, and we need to do the things where the organisation is failing. So, that's sort of how I ended up there by default. And it was like, yeah, okay, you want this job, otherwise you start looking for another one. And I was like, okay, great. What's my team? Just you. What's your budget? Well, there is none. Like, what could possibly go wrong? But yeah, well, I mean, we made do, and we did pretty good things. So it was kind of scary, I guess, if you look at how healthcare was as a whole. And we were by no means unique in this. This was healthcare globally, I'd like to say.
Globally, yeah, healthcare did not understand security.
Let's email patient records.
Yes.
Or slightly better, we'll fax them.
Oh, no, so yes, I remember I couldn't get a doctor to give me my records to take to another doctor.
Yep.
But they would email them from a Gmail account.
Yep.
To anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been my email, or it could have been some
at least whoever. With a fax, unless there's a fax machine on the other end. Yeah. It's going nowhere, right? If it goes to the wrong place, generally. Yeah. And these days, there's less and less faxes around, thankfully.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a pretty good segue into when My Health Record came about. So the federal government in Australia introduced My Health Record, which was a central register of imaging, client records, consulting notes, pathology results, all in one place, which a lot of people were inherently against because it's Big Brother. But I was for to a point, and I was for it if you've got a prolonged history of acute care, or you're being treated for something really serious. Having all of those records available to everybody who is going to be seeing you and treating you, I think can only lead to increased quality of care.
Right.
But people were like, do you trust the government with their security? And I was like, I don't have a problem with the government, right, with having those records. My beef is going to be with the 28,000 plus GP practices around Australia who spend exactly $0 on security.
Yes, exactly.
So why would you try and hack the government when you could just walk into a medical center and plug in a laptop, game over.
Yep. No. So many GPs that I saw, and I actually used to um, manage a few GPs, and they weren't too bad, but yes, most of the GPs had no restrictions on any of their computers.
Yep.
Everything was just there's no encryption. You could
Yep.
walk right in and take a hard drive, and
generic user accounts and passwords were rife everywhere.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, thankfully at the time, there wasn't really a huge.
It wasn't really a huge in demand for the PI, right?
No.
Now it is. I mean, it's worth, a patient record is now worth more than a credit card.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And thankfully people are taking it seriously. I think now that boards have to mitigate risk and they can be held accountable for it. There's been a dramatic shift in the focus on risk security within healthcare, which is a good thing. But I still think Australia is lagging behind the US in particular. People are going to get upset about this, but I'm not talking about in primary health. I'm talking about in the fact that America has HIPAA.
It does, and
I think Australia desperately needs. We've got PCI DSS, we've got all of these other standards, APRA, for instance.
Yep.
We don't have anything for healthcare.
No,
and I think that's a shocking oversight.
It is, and we spoke to Van about this, and he tried to say, "Well, HIPAA's so." I'm like, "You're missing the point. HIPAA there's two parts of HIPAA."
Yep.
And one is that baseline security controls, and it's like, well, Australia really doesn't have anything, and there's the privacy laws here basically are useless.
So if you look at the Australian privacy principles, there are some specific things in there which are great. One of those is like you can't use a patient record for anything apart from its intended purpose.
Yeah.
Or if there is a very obvious where the person whose record it is would expect it to be used that way. And that's kind of a common sense approach, but it still needs far more governance.
Yeah.
We did introduce the notifiable data breach scheme, and I think that was a good thing. The one thing that really annoys me about that is that government is exempt. Right.
And most of these are government agents.
That's right. They're probably holding
quasi-government. Yeah.
They're holding some of the most sensitive records in Australia, right? And they're exempt from the scheme that they introduced.
Yeah.
And I think the notifiable data breach scheme is a good thing. It provides transparency to people whose records are compromised. And that was something that was lacking in the privacy principles and the Privacy Act of 1988.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing. There's really been no update for this new digital world to it. And, and even, the data breach, was Vodafone had a big one, and then
Optus.
Optus
and
Medibank. So those are the two that came about. But in the US, they would have been fined tons of money.
Yep.
And here it was just kind of like a slight slap on the wrist, and it's like, well, no, they actually need to, one, have a baseline standard that they have to adhere to.
Yep.
And then two, if they don't meet that, and if there is a breach, then you fine them.
Yep.
Because
so under the notifiable data breach, I mean, there's penalties there. They're probably harsher on an individual than they are on an organization.
Yeah, the organization ones it's minuscule.
Yeah. And but in terms of percentage wise, it's a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
Whereas if you as an individual were fined, that's going to hurt.
Yeah.
We're talking bankrupting kind of figures unless you're fairly wealthy. But and I think that's out of skew. It needs to be rethought about, and maybe it should be a percentage of gross revenue.
Yeah.
Then
it should be.
Then the penalty fits the crime and the organization.
Yeah, I think it should be. Yeah. So that's. I did disagree with Van a little bit because
I don't think HIPAA's perfect by any means.
No, it's not.
But it is a good start.
It is a very good start. And he was like, well, it's a deal with the insurance stuff there. And I'm like, actually, Australia's probably a little bit closer to the US than they want to admit in some of that. But it doesn't, again, yes, there's a lot of security stuff that's built into HIPAA that just Australia, it's like, that's kind of a nice to have. Whereas HIPAA's like, no, you must have.
Yeah, correct. And like we're all working towards things like the ASD or cyber, ACSC, Essential 8, and the maturity levels within that. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. But there's no mandate. It's just...
There is if you're a government department. So that's where it's funny. Or if there's also SOCI, which is the critical infrastructure.
Yes.
Which surprisingly not all of healthcare falls into. So within Tasmania, the only two things that fall under SOCI is the Royal Hobart Hospital and the Launceston General Hospital. The other hospitals don't, which is I find strange.
Yeah.
I would have thought the entire health system would probably be critical infrastructure. But,
So we've had a lot of security breaches in 2024. Now we're 2025, but
that's not going to slow down.
It's not going to slow down. So one of the big ones, and there's lots to talk about with this one, is CrowdStrike.
Yep.
Right. So,
and that wasn't really a breach per se, but it was just an epic fail. Of quality assurance, right?
Yeah.
And it goes to show how having such a wide market penetration can lead to catastrophe if you don't have good governance.
Yeah. And well, it also goes to, the way that they've inserted the program to run.
Pre-boot.
Pre-boot.
Ring zero.
And is this, and I think Microsoft has now had...
they're now reviewing
that practice with all the security vendors and going, well, maybe this wasn't such a great idea after all.
I think the thing out of the biggest thing that came out of this was not the failure per se for me. It is, so I have a very good understanding of black hats. I have friends that have definitely been on the darker shade of grey over the years. And I would suggest that now every black hat in the world knows that there is a pre-boot kernel driver that has an auto update facility. Now we look at third-party data, like third-party breaches, and we come up with something like SolarWinds, right? How many of their customers got compromised through the auto update functionality because they got access to the code signing certificates? They got access to the update infrastructure, and they weren't noisy initially. They're very, very quiet about what they did, and then they pushed malicious updates. And I think Xero, the finance software, exactly the same thing happened. And we can very, very easily say where that one originated and why it was targeted, given who the customers of Xero were in a particular country that's besieged at the moment. And it's only this kind of problem is only going to get larger. I mean, it is the easiest way to breach a large number of customers. If you look at who SolarWinds customers were, they were federal government, US federal government clients, right?
Yep. And government clients around the world, right?
And we would suggest that, not always, but in a lot of instances, there would be a lot more security at the target end than there is at their provider. Yep. So compromise the provider, compromise.
Yep. Supply chain attacks.
Yep. And so my concern out of CrowdStrike is that now they know that this facility exists. And CrowdStrike's a security vendor. I mean, like nothing would get more kudos in the underground world than compromising one of the largest security vendors in the world, right? And by proxy, all of their clients.
Yep. And it wouldn't be unprecedented. I mean, Cisco, Juniper, all these SonicWall just came out with another massive
Fortinet as well.
area. So yeah, Fortinet. Yeah, actually, that was big in December.
Palo had one. Like that.
Yeah,
No one is exempt from this.
No, exactly right. So,
and I even saw the other day.
How trusted is your security vendor?
That's right. And and this is where defense in depth and good security controls, and not just security controls, but security controls assessing, testing of security controls to make sure that, yes, they are effective. Because it's easy to go it's not easy, but it's easier to go and get ISO 27001 and go, right, we ticked all the boxes.
Yep.
But how effective are those controls in the real world?
Yeah. And do you actually follow those controls? Because I've seen companies, put in the ISO and then go, yep, we've ticked all the boxes. We're now ISO certified. But then you actually talk to the engineers and the people running day-to-day, and they don't always follow the rules.
Or we certified a tiny part or function of our business, not everything, which is the easiest way to get it right. Start focused and then expand it. But how many of the companies actually do go and expand the program after they obtain that certification? Yep, we've got that. It's like, SOC 2 as well. And I'd be lying if I said I hadn't seen a company who turned on policies for their audit and then had a reverse policy that undid all of those security controls for user convenience after the audit had occurred.
Yeah.
which you can imagine how that sat with me, right? I'm sitting here going, make it stop.
Yeah. Just because you have the piece of paper, just because you're certified, doesn't really mean that. I mean, it's a good starting point, but
all of these frameworks are frameworks, right?
Yeah.
They're not Bibles for security. They are a framework to get a decent baseline. But they need to be adapted, and your controls need to be adapted for the real world.
Yeah.
It's same as with exemptions. Some things don't make sense in all industries. The security controls required for a bank or a government department holding, every Australian's record since the 1960s, their requirements are probably a lot higher than your ma and pa shops or your.
And this is where I think the banking industry, because they actually lose money if they were to get breached, do such a great job. Obviously, some better than others. But some of them, their security is top-notch, excellent. And you're going, look, they've been doing this for 25 years with this. But
you've got to remember, some of those are still on systems that were implemented 25 years ago, right?
Yeah, but they had multi-factor, security cards.
But then you've also got a big four bank in Australia where the PIN to access your online banking can't be longer than 4 digits. Or the password, if it's password based, can't be longer than 8.
Yeah, and then some of them, some of them like still use the text message as the multi-factor and stuff. And
there's a great article on Krebs on security about can we now just agree that SMS OTP is insecure? And it's a really good read. I would recommend everybody who works in security or in operations has a read of it, and then pushes for doing away with SMS OTP.
Yes. Although I do have a pet peeve with Microsoft. I have lots of pet peeves with Microsoft. If you haven't been able to tell by now. But one of them is that they try to push now everything to use their authenticator app. Whereas I'm like, I want to use my YubiKey. Why can't I use my YubiKey? And it's like, oh, well, no, you have to turn on to allow YubiKeys in that environment. And they just push. And still, even though they still push you to use their authenticator app. And it's like, well, the authenticator app kind of sucks. And if I lose my phone, then I have to get an administrator to come in and reset it so that I can then set up my phone again.
When it's whenever you add something to the authenticator app and it says, you should back up these keys, you 100% should save those backup codes because my phone died trying to get
Microsoft Authenticator, you can't. Some accounts you can't back up.
So I struggled for months to get everything back because I'm a big proponent and a big supporter of MFA.
Yes.
And it's great. But then I look at I look at sites where I use them once or twice and I think it's not worth it. Right, I use a unique password for everything. Everybody should use unique passwords for everything.
Password
managers, and, except for LastPass, who got compromised twice.
Don't use the cloud one unless you absolutely have to.
Look, I'm old school. I still use KeePass.
I'm the same. I still use it as well.
And KeePassium on my phone, and and it works.
Yes, it works very well.
And now it's built into iOS that if I've got a KeePassium on there, when it wants to use a password, it'll go, oh, is it in your iOS or is it in KeePassium? And I'm like, it's in KeePassium. It's always in. Sorry, or some other product. But it's old school, but it works. And I highly recommend that.
Yeah.
But
and I would just say, even if you use LastPass or one of the cloud ones, it's better than not using one.
Yep.
And hopefully LastPass has learned from its lessons and won't do that again. But use something.
Yep. And I think this is a good point to say that NIST came out and said, we screwed up. We gave you bad advice for the last 20 years. Complex passwords, password complexity requirements. It's not natural human language, right?
Mm.
So remembering uppercase, lowercase, alphanumeric, 0 to 9.
Yeah.
And
special character.
Special character, it's not natural language for our brain. So for IT nerds or people with OCD and somewhat on the spectrum, like most IT people, it's probably not as bad for us as it is for our end users. And for them to come out and say this was bad, like make passwords long, don't enforce complexity.
Yep.
Start using passphrases.
Yeah,
and and when I say passphrase, I'm not talking about like the XKCD password, horse, sheep, goat, with a hyphen between each of them and a number at the start and a number at the end. Like literally English language phrases. Yes, they're longer to type, but it's natural language that our brain understands.
Yep.
And it's far easier to recall and to type. So
yes.
There's the pro tip. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, still use a password manager.
Yeah. Yep. But for
the ones that you actually need to remember.
Yep.
Which is probably the pass to your password manager.
Correct.
Use a passphrase. But yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I have been for sites. I just need to create an account on. I'll use one that is a simple password that has been compromised.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you know what? I don't care because I'm not putting any information into this.
Correct.
But I have, obviously, every bank has a different password and a different email account than I set up for the other, my other accounts, right? So you need an insecure account. So you have an email for all those accounts that you don't care about. You have an email account just for your high sensitive, like banking.
People in the crypto world have a burner phone that they use only for that purpose, right? It's never turned on except when they need it.
Yeah.
And
so I use a different account for my crypto. Yeah, that's for sure. So yes, separate email accounts, not just separate passwords.
You just outed yourself as having crypto.
I have crypto.
That's like it's cyber insurance.
Yeah.
Rule number 1 of cyber insurance: you don't talk about the fact you've got it.
Yes. No, I don't. I don't have much crypto, but I did dabble in it a few years ago. With that, I did. Was surprised that when Trump got elected, that Bitcoin went from 60,000 to 100,000, and but very disappointed that Ethereum basically didn't have a decent bump, and it's kind of stuck. And Bitcoin kind of being the gold. Sorry, this is a tangent.
It's all right. We're nerds.
Yeah. So Bitcoin kind of being that gold platform where it really is just that scarcity of the resource, right?
Yep.
Whereas Ethereum is a platform to do smart contracts.
Yep.
A platform to trade and to do NFTs, non-fungible tokens, right? So it's like, art selling.
Could they have come up with a worse name for that?
It's a terrible thing. Terrible name. But all the things that can happen on the Ethereum platform
Yep.
that Bitcoin still can't do or is just now trying to add on. But,
so a friend of mine, he got into this very, very early, but his Ethereum is where he's at, staking and what have you. And I feel like an idiot because he told me a long time ago I should get into this stuff. And I was like, it has no intrinsic value.
No, exactly.
Right.
And that's why I only put like tiny amounts in.
It's vaporware.
Yeah.
And then I look back and I was like, yep, who's the idiot now?
Yeah, I remember when it was like big news in the IT community that Bitcoin was over $90 a Bitcoin. And it's like, oh, crap.
Look, I remember
it went
when
from like $1 to $90. Like, oh, maybe should I get some? And like, nah.
I remember when you could mine hundreds of coins a day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that really was, if you held onto it, money for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bit of power.
Well, but unfortunately, most of the guys that did mine back then lost all their wallets.
Yeah.
Because they're like, it's worthless. Who cares? And reformatted. And oh.
So one of the hacks that's probably noteworthy was when Ledger got hacked. Someone I know is a Ledger user, and they also bought me a Ledger wallet. Actually got phishing via snail mail. Right? Wow. Wish I still had it. But yeah, so they got the customer database of everyone who'd ordered ledgers and where they were sent to, and sent out snail mail phishing to the customer base. I'm like, that is wild. I haven't seen that since someone faxed a Nigerian print scan to one of our medical centers. Fax.
Oh, yes. The Nigerian print scams.
Yeah,
those are hilarious. And,
there's probably a Nigerian prince out there with bucket loads of money who's been trying to give it to someone.
Yeah. Well, now they're all on Facebook.
Well, soon to be joined by your AI friends that no one asked for.
Yeah. All the girls that love you long time. And
didn't you see Zuck's announcement?
Well,
they're going to start introducing AI bot friends. So I logged into Facebook last night for the first time in forever because I don't do socials.
Yeah, well, I was off social media for 3 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I found that if I stopped using it, I missed out on a lot of friends' events because they don't. Yeah. No one picks up the phone and it's like, "Hey, Jay, do you want to come to my party?" Or it's my birthday. Hey, I posted. It was on Facebook, dude, and I'm like, I just don't log in.
Yeah, that's the exact same thing. So that's why I've restarted.
But I logged in last night, and the feed was just full of bullshit. That I didn't ask to see. Like, no, there's no posts from my friends.
No,
it's some random dude. Do you want to follow? No, I don't want to follow. Like, I don't know these people. I don't care about them. I don't understand this current mentality that's in the world of. Let's look at video game streamers. Prime example. I want to play video games. I don't want to watch someone else play it. I don't understand that mentality.
But the Twitch thing has been going on for a long time.
And look,
like 10 years now.
Highly successful.
Yeah, and I don't understand it either. I think my son is a bit into it. He likes to watch some of it, probably because he's not allowed to play some of the games, and so he watches it on YouTube until we find out.
Yep.
But I don't. Yeah, I like you. I don't.
The fun is in the doing.
Yeah,
not in watching. It was like school. I sucked at school, not because I was unintelligent, but because I don't learn from someone talking at me. Give me something hands-on to do.
Yeah.
And so when I went to college, there was pure math, which was university entry-level math. But a teacher at my school came up with math applied. So it had the same, what would be called ATAR now, entry requirements for university for math. Instead of sitting in a classroom and reading out of a textbook or watching him write on a chalkboard as they were back then, no computers back then, we went out into the bush with compasses and set squares and did calc, trig, algebra in the real world. Yeah. And it actually, it killed that. You remember the question of why do I need to know this?
Yeah.
When am I ever going to use it in life? It applied it to real world scenarios, and it actually made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And if more of my courses had been like that, there's no chance that I wouldn't have gone to university. So probably a good time to say. So I don't have a degree. In fact, I really didn't finish much more than year 11. But that was because school wasn't suited to my mentality and my, the way my brain operates. But it hasn't stopped me succeeding in my career, because IT was all about, particularly pre-Google days, right?
Yeah.
It was RTFM, trial and error, and process of elimination.
Yeah.
And it taught us a great set of skills. I mean, I've used it outside of my IT career, doing things like becoming a backyard mechanic, right?
Problem-solving skills is the big one. I mean, in IT, that's probably the number one. Right?
You watch,
and you're either good at it or you're not.
And I don't think it's a developed skill, right? It is something that is inherently in you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get a lot of flame for this. Some people should not work in IT.
Yes.
It is just not their cup of tea, and no amount of learning or no amount of study is going to change that, because their brain doesn't think laterally and or logically. And I think the lateral thinking is that the outside of the box thinking, particularly when, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're tired as hell, you've been up for 2 days at this point.
and you're thinking, well, the problem, it's this server's not coming up, so you think it's a problem with that server, but it's really some other server or some other service that's failed, that somehow there's a connection there and it's going, I can't get that, so I'm going to fail.
Yep.
And so, you have to think outside the box. So, well, what is all this other interior stuff that it could actually be? Because it's, that looks good. And I think that was, that was an issue I hit quite a lot with Windows servers and change control.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm taking another tangent here, but it made me think, where you used to spend so much time trying to diagnose an issue, and when ITIL and you have change control, you're not allowed to reboot the servers. You try and find the fault and
going back to my framework comment. Just remember, ITIL is a framework, not a Bible.
Yeah, exactly. And then you go and you sit there and you're like, well, then you start making changes.
And now you
shouldn't make.
Yep.
When all it is the server probably needed to be rebooted because there was some corruption in the RAM or
have you turned it off and on?
Have you turned it off and off? And I taught my wife this, and she goes, anytime she goes to like a doctor's office or a retail store where they're having issues or something,
have you turned it off
and off again? Because that's what my husband would say.
And look, a large percentage of the time.
Yeah.
So when I worked at the federal government, there was a guy on the service desk. So I started on the service desk like most people did, and the best part about starting on the service desk is there are two types of people. Those that are happy to do that for the rest of their life, and they're the rare case, right? But there are some people who like it because they do their job 9 to 5, whatever. They hang their bag up when they leave, and that's it. They don't think about it. Whereas the further we progress through IT, the more it becomes a more full-time outside of work engagement as well. And there was this one guy, and he was from a European country, who was killing it because they'd monitored call stats, right? How long were you on the call? How many calls did you resolve? How many tickets did you resolve in that time? Yada, yada. This guy was smashing like 130 to 160 calls a day on a service desk, right? And everyone thought that was fantastic until they brought in call monitoring, where the supervisor or the IT boss could actually listen into people's calls. So this guy's answering the phone, it'd be like, reboot, goodbye, and then just hanging up the phone.
Closing the ticket. Nice.
Now, to his credit, he was probably right.
70% of the time?
More than 50% of the time. But it didn't go down very well. He wasn't employed very, very long after that. But I just thought that was hilarious, right? And it's one of those stories that have stuck with me for my entire life. And, he played the odds game.
Yeah. And to me, it's why, you start there. And that's what, and look, while it's frustrating, you call into these big companies telcos and whatever, and they ask you to turn it all off and turn it back on again. But it's tried and true.
Yep.
This is an issue.
And it fixes it so many times. That's why it's part of their playbook.
Yeah,
it's not because, we're just trying to annoy you or make you go away. It is literally, this works more often than not.
Yeah. And there's science behind it, because, there's the magnetic fields that come from the sun and others. And we talk about all the...
or a tiny flaw in an EEPROM or a capacitor.
Yeah. Oh, it does, but that those magnetic fields, because everything's worked off, magnetism and electricity and sort of stuff, and so when you have something that some interference can switch and can corrupt something in the memory, and all of a sudden it's just not working as planned, it cause an issue. Some of it can be the operating system.
Well, they're called solar flares. Have quite an impact.
Well, so, it knocks out satellites and our 4G and 5G, but it also can make a difference and mess up your electronics. So that's why it's good to restart your computers every once in a while, because it does clear out all that.
That and things like poorly written code can lead to memory corruption, memory leaks, and
So basically, Windows restart every couple days.
Yep. Scheduled reboots are the go. 3 o'clock in the morning.
3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. Well, now with the browser history, it comes back up and remembers all your stuff.
Well, applications that were reopen.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Especially Teams.
Yes.
Like you close Teams and it's like, I don't want to close, so it reopens again.
Yeah.
Kill it again, and it goes, I'm going to start again.
You can quit Teams and tell it not to auto start, and it'll still restart. Actually, I had that problem with Windows Mail. Yep. When the new Outlook Mail, and it would you'd close it, and then about every 10 minutes, it just kept opening up again. And I go, what is this tied to? Yeah. Like I went into the scheduled task trying to find out
startup apps.
It wasn't in startup apps, but it was like it's weird to just come on like every 15 minutes or something.
Yep. Yeah.
I close it, and I'm like.
I
had to uninstall it.
I closed you for a reason. Stop.
Yeah. Why are you opening up again? But yeah, very strange.
Windows. Keep on being Windows.
I bag on Microsoft quite a lot. They do make some good products. I'm not saying they don't, but there is a lot of frustration.
Look, and I think the amount of money. Look, so let me preface this by saying my approach to life is vendor agnostic, right? If the tool works for the job, I use it. Yeah. But I'm not wed to any brand.
Exactly.
But I will say my first foray into cloud, which is kind of ironic being an ex-Googler, that it was AWS.
Yeah. AWS, I think, is awesome, by the way.
100%. So I'd never used AWS before, and I had to build an auto-scaling e-commerce platform prior to what in Australia is called ClickFrenzy. So it was a horrible e-commerce platform that would die on this is a $13,000 a month server. It would die after 4 concurrent user sessions because it's right heavy in the database.
All right.
And I managed to scale that on AWS in a weekend where I couldn't knock it over with 200,000 concurrent connections.
Wow.
And auto-scaling, middleware, front-end, back-end, lots of caching between everything. And I learnt that from reading the manual. I think we should preface this with this has been quite an off-the-cuff, organic conversation, not a well-scripted. Yes. We had a bunch of topics to talk about.
Yes.
Sort of just went where it went, right?
The script went out the window.
Yep.
Yeah. I know you're a big car guy.
Yep.
So you love cars.
I love my car.
You love your car.
I couldn't care less about what someone else drives. That's not my problem.
Exactly.
But I love my car and I love working on it. So
yeah, and I think I've found a car that I love.
Yeah, I love your car too.
And I've had it for quite a long time. Yep. And I have no desire to go get another car.
Yep. Same.
And well,
particularly now that I know how to fix it, and I think this is a really, really cool thing, and it goes back to talking about how school wasn't for me. If YouTube had existed when I was at school, I would have excelled.
Yeah.
Because as a learning medium of actually seeing someone do the things. So I'd never worked on a car before April year before last. And I chose the worst freaking car to work on. But, you know, I've replaced so much, upgraded, replaced the entire coolant system, you know, the entire charge system, the intercooler, downpipes, all from watching YouTube videos.
Yeah, well,
Right? And no book, no nothing, just watched YouTube videos. And I'm like, I can do this. And what's interesting is that I've pulled that car apart so many times now. I used to bag everything up and put a label on it and say, you know, this came from here, and take photos. And these days I just pull it apart, throw everything in a pile and put it back together because
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I have nothing left over at the end, so I think it's a good thing, right?
Yeah. No, it's a good. I'm just saying, is it a bad thing that you've had to take it apart that many times where all go?
Valid. It is definitely a bad thing that I've had to pull it apart that many times. Don't buy a BMW ever. A great piece of machinery, but when it breaks, it breaks.
Yeah.
And you know, it's quite a baby car. It's 90,000 kilometers. And it's 14 years old. And we've owned it since pretty much new. So high performance, high breakage.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I have no desire to get another car.
Yep.
One, because my car is awesome. But also, two, because new cars suck.
Correct. The build quality is subpar.
But not only the build quality, so, and this is also there's a couple things. One is the technology.
Yeah.
Right. So my car has just enough technology to make it good.
Yep. Mine doesn't even have like CarPlay or, you know, Android.
No. I had to put in a secondhand. Aftermarket stereo.
I have to plug my phone into an auxiliary port by, you know, lightning to 3.5 mil and play it through that, which it still works.
Yeah.
But it's not ideal.
Yeah. No. So yeah, exactly. Mine was was the year before Bluetooth came out.
Yep.
In that
So
car.
I've got Bluetooth phone built into the head unit and everything.
Yep.
And into the steering wheel buttons and whatever. But no Bluetooth for audio.
Yeah.
Which is like, seriously? Come on.
Well, and I don't know about BMW on the aftermarket one. At least
it's difficult because
mine was at least it was a standard DIN, and I could double DIN, and I could just replace.
Not that simple because it's tied into everything. There are 13 different ECUs in the car.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Or control modules, but you know, it's painful.
Yeah. But so my wife's car has all the new technology in it. It's
driving
years
assist.
Old now, but driving assist drives me nuts.
Yep.
And the push button, like mine has push button start, but I still have the gear shifter. But the push button gear change, like park, reverse, drive, and I always feel like I'm supposed to do something else. Like, and I just the muscle memory does not work. Everything feels strange.
When the steering wheel starts fighting against you.
Oh, that's yeah.
I've been driving for over 30 years, right? Never have I driven into a, you know, inanimate object, a parked car.
Yeah.
But this thing is like fighting me because I'm going across a double unbroken white line because there's a big ass like ram parked on the side of the road.
Yeah.
And our lanes here are quite small.
Yeah.
So I have to go over the line to safely avoid it. But it's like, you've just gone over a double unbroken white line. And going,
drives you nuts.
Can you not? Just And in my dad's got a little Corolla, and that's got all of this fancy stuff. But with his, you can turn it off. When you start the car again, it's off. But we
see, my wife's car, you have to turn off every time you start the car again.
100%. So we hired, when the car was in pieces being fixed, we hired a lot of different cars. Ford Ranger, probably the favorite would have been the Kia Sportage.
Oh yeah.
But the Kia, you had to turn it off every single time you started the car. The other thing that annoys the shit out of me, stop start.
Yes. It's the most stupid invention ever.
So
probably uses more fuel.
Correct. And years ago, I did my bike learners course. And I was taught that when you stop, gear down, back into first gear, ready to pop the clutch and hit the gas. Because if you saw KCAM in your rear vision mirror, that's not slowing down. That's Mac backwards for the people that didn't grab that. You want to be able to avoid an accident.
Yes.
So if you're stuck at the traffic lights, and like I park next to or come up the inside of lots of cars that, where there's 2 lanes turning right, because they always take off slowly, when you hear the engine stop, and then by the time the light goes green, it's like 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So if you needed to get out of the way of danger, that's 3 seconds lost, which at 60 kilometers an hour,
you're not going to make it.
That's a big, big problem.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the most ridiculous emissions, and it's an emission feature, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't
not
save
safety.
Any emissions unless you stop for like 5 minutes at a light.
Yeah,
which hopefully your lights are not that long. But yeah, I don't think it saves any fuel at all.
And then we see idiots on YouTube all the time. If you're like me, you watch a lot of YouTube. Going down the the LA freeway, reading a book in their Tesla.
Yeah.
Like,
please don't.
What is wrong with you?
Please don't do the autopilot.
What is wrong with you? At least have your hands on the steering wheel so you can override it.
Yeah. Because I don't trust it.
No.
Yeah.
And there was a real moral dilemma that came up with full self-driving. And one of the earliest things that was raised was, if a pedestrian is going to get hit by the car or the car's going to crash, who does it protect?
Yeah.
The person in the car or the person walking?
Yeah.
And I still haven't seen an adequate answer to that. It's definitely a moral quandary.
Yes.
I think I'd rather take the hit in the car and take my chances than run over a pedestrian.
Exactly. Your car and my car, like, they're a joy to drive.
It's a driver's car.
It's a driver's car. It's
visceral. You feel the road. It's up to you.
Yeah. And these electric cars, I'm like, they get you from point A to point B, but
there's no excitement about driving.
It's like
people say to me,
just ride in a taxi.
But it does 0 to 100 in like 3.1 or 2.9.
Yeah.
Why does it need to?
It doesn't need to. Yeah.
They're not a race car. There's no way you'd race one.
No.
They're not designed for the track. And I imagine driving them on the track would be challenging. They're heavy.
Yeah.
They've got instant on torque. And which, don't get me wrong, you can have as much torque as your clutch will allow, but anyway. But I guess another thing around that is, like, we grew up driving stick. Manual. Yep. Standard in some parts of America, I think, is how they call it. Correct?
Yeah, stick was mainly.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I still love that. Mine, I have a 6-speed manual. They're only...
I kind of wish mine was, but at the time I got the deal on the automatic. But yeah.
So my car, I think
it's got Tiptronic.
125
flappy paddles
manuals released in Australia. That was it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I bought the manual.
Yeah.
Like, it's so much easier to control. You take it to the track, down gears, up gears, you're not just driving with the steering wheel, you're driving with torque control, acceleration.
Yeah. Well, I still ride my motorcycle, most days of the week, and, using the gears. And now they have Yamaha's come out with basically a gearless, an auto version, and I'm like, and I guess you can turn it into manual mode or whatever, but
so it still has the gear lever.
Yes.
Yep.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember it now, but Yamaha does have a new automatic.
No.
But no, I'm like, look, for a friend of mine, she actually has an issue and with one of her arms does not work that well. So, having that automatic actually is a great thing for her. She still wants to ride.
Yep.
But for most of us, I'm like, if you know how to use gears properly,
I will say,
awesome.
Learning to ride a bike on a step through was so much easier than one down and then up.
Yes.
That was an interesting thing. I'm not used to that. Or I wasn't used to that. But with the step through, you just keep stepping through it.
Well, so yeah, race shift. So race shift is awesome, and yeah, I think one of the races, because I was back and forth between race shift and standard, and I did race motorcycles for a very short period of time.
Crazy.
And yeah, and I think I stalled on the start line because I'd gotten to it and I'd messed up. I'd shifted into second instead of first, because I was just in street mode and went into there versus race mode. But yeah, pounding down just in race mode.
Yep.
Yeah, super.
So that
quick.
was just through down.
Down.
Yep.
Yeah, just
because it's so counterintuitive. One down, then up.
Yeah.
And back through neutral on the way up.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not. I get it now, but when I first jumped on a bike, I was like, "This is so freaking weird."
No. So it should only be race mode. But now you don't even need it because with the quick shifters.
Yep.
So automatic shifting, like you don't even have to use the clutch, and so it's just as easy to go up.
Yep.
And stay in standard shift because the electronics do all the shifting anyways.
Yep.
So yeah.
But there's something like, having now worked on cars way more hours than I would care to admit, there's something about the lack of electronics. Like, auto electrics is probably the hardest thing about cars. And now that they're going more and more everything electric, it's harder to do DIY.
Yeah.
So my car, it's all very mechanical. I now understand how a gearbox works, how a clutch works, how a diff works. None of that scares me. But if anything were to go wrong with it electrical, it's going to an auto electrician.
Yeah.
I'm not touching it, even though I'm quite capable of using a multimeter and various other tools and crimping cables and soldering cables. I wouldn't want to do it.
No.
So something goes wrong with the battery pack in your electric car, you're not fixing that yourself.
No. Yeah. You don't have to do oil changes, but pretty much everything you have to do.
But there's still oil in the motors, right?
Yeah,
I believe there is.
Yeah, there might be. Yeah. But yeah, you're pretty much taking it in to get it serviced for everything. You're not going to do home servicing.
Yep.
On any of the electric vehicles, but yeah, and I don't know.
They just don't excite me.
They don't. And the rise of these Chinese electric cars, BYD and others. I mean, they're
selling more cars in Australia than any other manufacturer, right?
Yeah, it's
Except
no,
in
the electric, in the electric thing, Toyota's still like way above, because. Well, I think they've still continued to say, everybody says, oh, they bet wrong on the hybrid mode. Well,
I don't think they did.
I don't think they did. They're still killing it.
You're on the highway and it's using 4 liters to the 100 Ks.
Yeah.
Like that to me is a great thing. It's still got a petrol engine.
Yeah.
Internal combustion engine.
Yeah. So, and they're looking at hydrogen, and I think.
Well, so I think I was reading one of the top supercar manufacturers were like, we're betting on hydrogen fuel cell.
Oh yeah,
not electric, hydrogen.
Well, so hydrogen, they're looking at it for airplanes.
Yep.
And all these other use cases where just battery and electric just doesn't make sense.
Lithium is a finite resource, right?
Yeah.
So
hydrogen is,
it's not the
most.
It's not the be all end all. We can extract hydrogen from a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But it's like the most plentiful resource we have.
H2O.
Yeah. So, I think it's a good bet. Now, obviously, there's still a long ways to go.
The technology's, yeah.
Well, not on the technology. It's the storage. It's getting the hydrogen and getting it, storing it, and getting it out into the service stations. I do believe there was
one manufacturer who released hydrogen fuel cell in America.
And
years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I can't remember who it was, but was it Nissan or?
It was either Nissan or Toyota, one of the two. But there weren't a lot of places.
And Toyota has a bit here in Australia, but yeah, it's all about It's the same thing with look that Tesla had to deal with when it came about, right? And it was only because massive investment into Tesla, which of course nobody else could get at the time, and Tesla got billions of dollars to build out a charging network, right?
But not in Australia.
No, sorry, but because Tesla had tons of money and was able to sell stock and those sort of things, it was able to basically, the reason why they got so big was because they were able to build out this charging network.
Yep. And so here's the difference, the big difference between the US and Australia. While their landmass is fairly, within a margin of error, it's fairly similar in size.
Yep.
But the US is densely populated.
Oh, yeah. It's 10 times more
Australia
people.
Is, West Coast, East Coast, and a bit on the bottom. But then there's nothing in the middle.
Yeah.
But you're still talking about thousands and thousands of kilometers.
For charging stations.
Yep.
Or refilling stations.
So, for instance, to drive from South Australia to Perth, across the Nullarbor Plain, it's a couple of thousand kilometers, I believe. It's a 3 or 4 day trip for most people. If you're in an electric car, you need to plan your charging real well. Because that's desert.
Yep. You got to charge when you're supposed to. You can't go, I'll go for the next one.
Yeah. And then, you got your Toyota Land Cruisers and stuff with their dual fuel tanks that'll do 1,700 kilometers.
Yeah.
On a tank.
Yeah. They pretty much get there without a refill. Yeah.
And that's where Australia's a bit different. I mean, if it's city driving and whatever and being able to charge at home, that sort of stuff to me makes a lot of sense.
But even then, like a lot of Australia doesn't have, and parts of the US as well, like you don't have houses that have
15 amp plugs
or even garages, right? So a lot of people in a lot of places in both countries have cars, aren't able to park their cars in their own garage or whatever where they can charge it. So they're parked on the street.
I've actually seen extension cords running from someone's house out over the footpath and charging a car on the street.
And this is just insane to me.
And that in Sydney was pretty common because a lot of places didn't have garages.
Yeah.
And
I'm like, wild. I don't know if I want to just, run an extension cord, out to the street and then who knows what
could go wrong.
What could go wrong, exactly. And it just doesn't make sense. So this is one of the downfalls.
One of the big things happening that I saw in Sydney recently was a lot of body corporates are banning electric vehicle charging in underground car parks or even parking.
For risk of fire,
or even parking them under there.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty significant roadblock considering the vast population of Sydney these days is going to be living in multi-tenanted dwellings.
Yeah.
And there's, the fire ratings on them is sus at best in a lot of them.
So yeah, for that reason, I think hydrogen as a long-term solution is great. Look, I think we're going to have a mix. I don't think it's going to be any one technology that's going to solve it all. And that's where I don't think electric is the be-all, end-all. But it has its place.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate on them at all. It's just not the car for me.
No, not for me either. Well, one, because I like driving.
Yep.
I like fast driving.
Well, if you want to go and buy a driving car, go and buy a Lotus.
Yeah.
There is nothing power or electrical about anything in that. They are literally a mechanical beast.
Yeah.
And they're a lot of fun to drive.
Yeah. So but yeah, that's it'll be interesting where it goes once hydrogen figures out its distribution network.
Yep.
Because I think that's the biggest problem right now is how to distribute it. But they do know you can refill it in a couple minutes, like you can.
Yep. Even back in the day, that's Superlock. But the one thing that they had problems with was because it's super compressed. It would freeze the filling nozzle onto the car.
Yeah. Well, I think the other option now is what they're talking about is the fuel cell actually comes out
and you
just swap them.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right?
But it's like, that takes 30 seconds. Boom, boom. Stick it in, plug it back in, and off you go.
All of this driver assist stuff, learn to drive.
Yeah. and make it car manufacturers be able to turn it off once and for all. And it's like you can either turn it on or turn it off. You don't have to do it every single time. So that's just a pet peeve.
Yep. Never crashed into a stationary object or a moving object. So, you know.
Well.
Actually, sorry, I lie. I hit a kangaroo once.
Okay.
But there was nothing I could do about that.
No. Well, birds, another issue. But that's okay. That's another topic for another story.
There's still an issue for planes as well. So, you know.
Jason, it's been fun.
It has.
Thank you again. We'll definitely see you soon on the podcast. Thanks for watching. And check out the next one.
And dos cerveza, por favor.
Thanks for joining us today. And if you have any questions for the guests, pop them into the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe.